Hi, it's Rashay from SayItRashay.com, and welcome to my review of The Tragedy Paper by Elizabeth Laban. So, in The Tragedy Paper, we meet Duncan. He's an incoming senior at the Irving School. Each year at the Irving School, outgoing seniors leave a treasure for the person who's taking over their room. It could be anything from a CD to something more elaborate, exuberant, expensive gift. Duncan gets the room of Tim Macbeth. Tim was a transfer student, an albino student who had a tragedy happen to him. The tragedy paper is a paper that the seniors have to write each year. The tragedy is about anything that they want. Has to be somewhat based in literature, but they can take their own take on it, and it's kind of like a thesis. So in this book, we meet Duncan, who inherits this room from Tim, and his gift from Tim are CDs in which he listens to the story of Tim's year at the Irving School. There's a love triangle. Tim meets Vanessa as he's on his way to school, who has a boyfriend, Patrick. At times it felt like Patrick was not really fully developed. Patrick seemed like a brute, and that's all he was, a brute. And it just didn't explain why Vanessa didn't leave Tim or leave Patrick for something better, whether it be Tim or not. Tim was an albino, and as I learned that some albinos are ostracized and treated differently, but it just seemed like Tim, I don't know, he didn't seem to have a bad home life. He did have some trouble at his other school, but it just seemed like he kind of isolated himself for no other reason but to be isolated. Duncan, as he listened to the story, even though he was there and he knew parts of it, I guess he hadn't dealt with, I don't want to say his role in it, but the tragedy had happened the year before. That's kind of referenced into the book, and you find out what the tragedy is at the end. It was a compelling read. I read it in a couple days. I found myself thinking about the book a lot. Kind of drawn in like Duncan was as he listened to the story of Tim and Vanessa, and found myself wondering what I would do if I found myself in a situation where I was kind of on the outside, trying to fit in, but not wanting to fit in, and maybe trying to be a part of something that possibly didn't want me to be a part of it. I would recommend this book for maybe middle school and up. There's nothing inappropriate in it, nothing that made me uncomfortable, feel like I wouldn't want anybody else to read it. There's a great interview at the end with Elizabeth. She based the tragedy paper on an experience she'd had in high school, and it just made me understand a little bit more about why the book was called The Tragedy Paper. Again, go back a bit. I think some of the books I read are so tragic and dark that I found myself at first disappointed in the tragedy, but then as I thought about it for a bit, I realized that the tragedy that happened was tragic enough. It's a pretty dark ending to this book, and Duncan, even though he was there for part of the tragedy, to relive it through Tim's words and Tim's point of view made it just a little bit more, I don't know, sad. So, The Tragedy Paper by Elizabeth Laban, if you're looking for another light read, or not light, but if you're looking for a read before the end of summer, like what you see, check me out at SayItRashay.com or follow me on Twitter at SayItRashay. Thanks for reading along with me.